Last night before Mass, I was joking with Father Jay, telling him that Jesus referred to sparrows in the gospel today, and so my homily was going to be all about birds. And, well, actually, you know what? It is a little bit about birds today. Last weekend, while I was sitting on my deck enjoying this beautiful Father's Day, I was captivated by a couple of birds, probably sparrows, which had landed on a tree nearby. I sat and I watched these sparrows for a period of time, and then as they flew away, this Christian hymn kind of popped into my mind called "He Has the Eye on the Sparrow." I did a little bit of research, and I learned that this song was inspired by the lyric writer who made a visit to a couple by the name of Doolittle. Mrs. Doolittle had been bedridden for over 20 years, and her husband was a cripple, unable to do anything more than to kind of prop himself up to sit. But despite their physical limitations, both were known to live lives of Christian inspiration. And when asked what was the secret of their joy and hope, Mrs. Doolittle responded, "His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me." This beautiful and simple expression of her faith inspired a poem and a hymn that has traveled around the world, giving hope and comfort to those who trust in God and turn to Jesus in times of uncertainty and fear. In our gospel last week, Jesus calls the 12 apostles, and then he sends them out on mission, telling them that the harvest is abundant, but the laborers are few. And I can just imagine Peter in my mind's eye and the other 11 apostles all excited to begin their ministry of driving out demons and curing disease and illness. But then, this week, Jesus drops the bombshell on his apostles. To be his disciple is not easy. It's hard. He tells them it can lead to persecution and death. Their mission is difficult, and it can cause them to become afraid, to be terrified, to allow fear to paralyze them, and worse yet, to lead them astray. Certainly, to be afraid is part of human nature, even for the apostles. This is why in our gospel passage today, Jesus tells them three times in 7 verses, not to be afraid. Jesus reassures his apostles and us 2,000 years later that we can rely on God. He watches over them. He watches over us, even to the smallest detail, including the hair on our head. Nothing happens without God's knowledge, even a falling sparrow. If God keeps his eye on the lowly sparrow, then for sure he watches over us, you and me, with his love and mercy. So, what is it that we might fear? For many of us, it's the daily events of life that we have no control over. Maybe it's the loss of a job, severe illness, family problems, losing a loved one, maybe getting older and losing our independence. And for our younger friends, maybe it's the fear of not getting good grades in school, or not making the soccer team, or maybe not being liked by your classmates. Maybe it's the fear of loneliness, or the feeling of life not being meaningful. And yet Jesus tells us not to be afraid. We are not alone. God is watching us, paying attention to us, standing beside us. I think we can learn much from the Doolittles, who, despite their infirmities, are examples of Christian living for all of us. They inspired a song that changed the lives of millions around the world. The apostles were sent by Jesus to go out and to change the world. To do so, they would suffer for it. We too have a call to challenge our culture by living out our faith through our trials and the adversities of our own lives. Will some challenge us? Yes. Will some reject us? Yes. Might we be persecuted subtly or maybe not so subtly? Yes. And perhaps our only response is to stay faithful to God and to trust in Him like the Doolittles. St. Pope John Paul II, who lived through the most brutal times of the 20th century, surviving the Nazis and the communists, implored us to be fearless in our faith by saying, "Do not be afraid. Open wide the doors for Christ." We can choose to let our fears control us, or we can choose to face them and trust that God will help us if we open wide the doors for Christ to enter our hearts, our minds, our souls. The month of June is traditionally dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Now is the time to open up the doors for Christ to enter, to pray that He will enter and strengthen our hearts so that we may love fearlessly, live courageously with faith and hope. Just like the apostles, Jesus calls us to go forth into the world as His missionaries. The Eucharist gives us the courage and the strength to boldly proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ in the nooks and crannies and spaces of society, touching all those in need of the love of Christ. Together we can do this. Do not be afraid. His eye is on the sparrow, and He watches over us. God bless you.